Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about the spinal cord gross and neuroanatomy. We're going to have a look on the gross features of the spinal cord, and then we're going to get deeper and talk about the neuroanatomy, the tracts and what happens inside the substance of the subspinal cord. How do we receive sensations, and we take them by the ascending pathways up all the way to the brain to interpret what we're feeling in the environment around us, and how do we compose an information about the motor function that we want to execute and take it all the way down through the descending columns and the descending tracts all the way to the spinal cord, so that we can take the information to the muscles and the glands on whatever, and then we do a motor function. Now, I'm sure everyone knows the gross features of the spinal cord from foundation courses. So you guys know that our central nervous system is protected and covered by 3 layers of meninges. And these meninges are three. We have a tough upper outside dura mater, and we have the same thing around the spinal cord. We have arachnoid matter that fills in the gap between the dura mater outside and the pia mater that is closely and intimately attached to the spinal cord, and the pia mater that is wrapping around the spinal cord and the brain very, very intimately. And pia means intimate, الأم الحنون. It's very, very intimately attached. All right. Why do we need to remember the 3 layers? Because the pia mater, you guys, that is wrapping around the spinal cord, it has modifications. Why do we need the modifications? Think about your spinal cord that is running in the vertebral canal. All right, so here is the spinal cord and here is the vertebral canal. Now, if I have an outside layer, which is the pia mater that is intimately attached here, and I know that there is the dura mater outside, and filling in the gap is the arachnoid. I don't want to talk about the arachnoid now. I'll talk about the pia, because there are some terminologies that confuse the students between parts of the spinal cord and parts of the pia mater. What happens is the pia mater has modifications. It just modifies itself in some places because we want to fix the spinal cord in the vertebral canal. Along the length of the spinal cord, you're going to see something called denticulate ligament. It looks like dentins. You guys know dentin? It means tooth-like projections. All right, so denticulate ligament is actually a modification of the pia mater that attaches the spinal cord, and that fuses with the dura mater in all the way throughout the length of the spinal cord. That way, I can make sure that my spinal cord is fixed in the vertebral canal. This is one thing. Another thing, and you guys can see here the pia mater and how we have the denticulate ligament fixing the pia mater, fixing the spinal cord in the dura, and the dura is already attached to the bony structures around me in the vertebral column. All right, another modification is the phylum terminalis, like what we said here. Oh yeah, okay, still I have it. At the end of the spinal cord, you guys have your conus medullaris, right? The end of the this is the spinal cord. At the end, you're gonna see a cone-like structure. This is what we call conus medullaris. It's just a conus structure. So it's a conus end of the spinal cord. So it doesn't confuse, right? Now, if I have the phylum terminalis, it's a phylum, it's a modification of the pia mater that we were just talking about it here in red. And that phylum terminalis, it goes all the way to the tip of coccyx in your bony part of the vertebral column and fixes the spinal cord from down. All right. So if you guys look at the spinal cord, I'm trying to stress on the things that used to confuse me when I was a student. All right. So if this is the spinal cord, the lower end of it is the conus medullaris. That's perfect. It's a conus end. It's part of the spinal cord. But if I have a terminal phylum means it's a structure that is thread-like. It's just like a thread-like. All right. This is gonna be a modification of the pia mater. It's not a part of the spinal cord. It's a modification. The pia mater is going to change itself into a phylum, a very terminal phylum that is going all the way down to fix the spinal cord to the tip of coccyx. And that way I can make sure that my spinal cord is firmly fixed in the vertebral canal. All right, so if that is my spinal cord, okay, the spinal cord, it has the conus medullaris end, and it has the phylum terminalis, which is basically a modification of the pia mater. The meningeal layer that is intimately attached to the spinal cord, you cannot differentiate it from the spinal cord. If I put a pin on the spinal cord and I tell you what meningeal layer is there, you're gonna see it's a pia mater, just without even trying to see it. It's just intimately attached to it. All right. And then that's regarding the spinal cord and the phylum terminalis. And if we get back to the denticulate ligament and you look at the spinal cord throughout its length, you're going to see something whitish in appearance, and it looks like what? Tooth-like projections, a denticulate. I forgot what do we call it. All right, so if you see something bulging, okay, it's not bulging, it's tooth-like projections, denticulate, okay. I wanted to say dense-like, but it's not dense-like, dentin. Then, all right, okay, so the denticulate ligament is gonna fix your spinal cord to the dura, and from there, you're gonna fix the spinal cord in the vertebral canal. What else do you want to see? If this is the spinal cord, okay, you're going to see the motor roots and sensory roots. How will you differentiate if this is the frontal aspect of the spinal cord, this is anterior or posterior? That will be when you see the spinal arteries. I'm going to tell you that as we proceed. And another thing, you guys need to know that we have enlargements. Do I have it here? Yeah, we have two enlargement in the spinal cord. If you look at the spinal cord, you have something called the cervical enlargement. It's going to be enlarged at that side. It's going to be bigger, spinal cord itself. It's going to be the thinnest at the thoracic region, because in the thoracic region, you only supply the intercostal muscles, all right? So these are very small muscles. They don't do a lot of function, all right? But in the cervical, here, you not only supply everything in the cervical region, you are also forming the brachial plexus and cervical plexus. And imagine the amount of muscles you are controlling in the cervical region by the cervical plexus, and the amount of muscles you are controlling in your upper limbs by the brachial plexus. So it should be bigger, right? And for the lumbar region, it's just the same. We have a lumbar enlargement. And then of course, here, because you guys know that we are taking care of the lower limb muscles, so the spinal cord is thicker at that region. All right, and what happens down here is the coda equina. What happens here is during development of the vertebral column, you guys know that in the embryology that the bones are faster than the neural tissue. So the vertebral column was way faster in growing than the spinal cord. So what happened is it was attached here and it was pulling it and it was getting bigger here, but the spinal cord was very slow. So I still have spinal cord, I still have spinal nerves for all the levels of my vertebral column, but my spinal cord is so small. All right, and that will take us to a very important thing. We're going to talk about it at the end of the video, which is in the spinal cord. Yes, you have spinal cord segments for all the levels, of the vertebral column, but you're going to see them condensed at the lower region. So at that exact region, you will see the spinal nerves from down are already there, and the spinal nerves themselves, when they come below the L1, which is the lowest level of the spinal cord, you're going to see them group together as only nerves without the spinal cord, and that is what we call the coda equina. And you guys know what coda equina means, right? If this is the coda equina, it means the tail of the horse, right? So if that is a horse, then this is what we mean by the coda equina. If the horse is your spinal cord, It means at the end of it, you're going to have the spinal nerves coming below L1, and they don't they don't have any other option other than grouping themselves together down below the spinal cord, below the level of L1. So this is what we mean by the coda equina. It's basically the spinal nerve roots that are below the level of L1, because at the level of L1, the spinal cord finishes, and then we need the spinal nerves to exit through their foramina, right? But what can I do? The spinal cord finishes at L1, and I have spinal nerves for L2, L3, L4, L5. So what can I do? What can I do is I can have all of them grouped together down, and then when the vertebral level comes, it will exit. All right. So if the spine, and of course the spinal cord segment is gonna be higher up, because then the spinal cord itself, it houses all the information, but the nerve that is taking the information to the effector muscle needs to exit from the same level. So if I have the segment here, even if it's a L3 segment, no problem, it's going to be above L1, but the spinal nerve L3 needs to exit down at its level. And we're going to see now how can we know the levels of spinal cord segments in relation to the vertebral column. All right. Um, so we've already talked about the spinal cord and the two enlargements we have, and the spinal nerves, how do they exit on both sides. The tough membrane outside is the dura mater, and the one that's intimately attached is the pia mater. The arachnoid is something like a web-like projections. We get to see them filling in the gaps. I don't have a picture here for the arachnoid, but make sure you know the dura mater, the denticulate ligament, the filum terminalis is going to be good in a fresh specimen, and your coda equina down, and all of the spinal nerves coming out of the spinal cord. All right. Perfect. Here we have an arachnoid fold. So if you guys can see a membrane-like structure that is inside the dura and outside the pia mater, that is going to be your arachnoid. All right, and this is again the denticulate ligament. We talked about that. We have roots, we have motor roots, ventral and dorsal. How will you differentiate between them? By the spinal artery. Now, remember, I told you we're going to talk about that now. You guys, the spinal cord is supplied by one anterior spinal artery and two posterior spinal arteries. Okay, the spinal arteries are mainly coming from the vertebral arteries above, but that doesn't mean that the vertebral artery is supplying all of this, the blood in down here. Of course not. We need reinforcements. So as we proceed down in the spinal cord, we're going to have people who are helping us to give us more blood into the spinal arteries. Remember when we talked about the arterial supply of the vertebral column? I explained to you there, what do we mean by segmental arteries? When I say I have segmental reinforcements, it means based on where you are, the important artery supplying that region is going to help you. Remember when we said that we have the posterior intercostals, we have the lumbar arteries, we talked about the sacral, the median and lateral sacral. If you don't remember that, go ahead and watch that video. And remember, what we're talking about, the vertebral column can apply here, because these are the segmental arteries we have along the length of the spinal cord. So if we ask from where we're getting the anterior and posterior spinal arteries, you can say vertebral, that's well and good. But as we reach down in the thoracic region, we have reinforcement, segmental reinforcement. From where? Remember from the previous video, it was the posterior intercostal artery. Okay, now we are in the lumbar region. Who's gonna help me? From there, we have the lumbar arteries. Okay, here down, we are at the sacral region. From the other video, we know that at this region, the artery that is going to donate blood and it's going to help in the segmental reinforcements for the vertebral column and the spinal cord is going to be the median and lateral sacral, and so on. All right. From where they are coming, I already explained that there. Remember, I also explained to you guys the importance of the artery of Adam-Quiggs. Here it comes this information. This artery is very important, because if anything happens to this artery, we're going to have a problem with the anterior spinal artery, because if everything is helping throughout the length of the spinal cord, the lower two-thirds of the spinal cord is depending mostly on the great artery of Adam Quicks, or the great radicular artery of the radicular artery. All right, this artery is very important because if anything happens there, we're gonna have shortage of blood supply to the lower two-thirds, and that is gonna give me what we call the anterior cord syndrome. I told you previously, and I'm going to say it one more time here. I'm not going to talk about what happens in the anterior cord syndrome now, because that we will explain at the end with the spinal cord injuries. But just remember and connect the information together. And remember from now, and remember when we take it there, then that this could be the reason why we get that lesion when we come to that video. All right. So after knowing the tracts and what happens in the spinal cord, you will appreciate what will happen if we have shortage of blood from this important artery in the lower two-third region of the spinal cord, giving us what we call the anterior cord syndrome. All right, perfect. And now here we have posteriorly, we have the same idea. We have, did I change the, should be. Okay, so posterior, we have two posterior spinal arteries. It should be two. I can see only one on the side. But in fresh specimens, you guys, you need to look for the spinal artery so that when they ask you in the exam to identify the roots, for example, which roots are these, you're gonna say this is dorsal roots or ventral roots based on the spinal arteries. If you can see two arteries coming on either side of the spinal cord, it means you are posteriorly. So these are the dorsal roots. If you can see only one spinal artery in the center, it means you are anteriorly. And what you have here is the ventral motor roots. This is a very important area of exam questions and practical exams, all right? Okay, so let's recap here what happens in the spinal cord. You guys know that the spinal cord, like we said in the introduction, it is composed of, we have a gray matter and we have a white matter. The gray matter has the cell bodies, and because of the H-shaped horn, that will divide my white matter into three funiculi. We have posterior columns, we have the lateral column, we have the anterior column, or we can call it funiculi. And this is what happens here. And we're going to talk about the internal structure of the spinal cord down the road. But let's get back to this. And you guys know that dorsal or posterior is the sensory part. And the ventral with R is your motor. So anything happens posteriorly is going to be sensory, and anything happens anterior is going to be motor, and more or less things happening in the lateral aspects is going to be autonomic. All right, so that is very important, because when we talk about the spinal cord later on, you need to know that the anterior horn cells, the cells that are here, they are giving you the cell bodies of the motor neurons. Here we're going to do motor function. However, if you are receiving a sensation with the cell bodies in the dorsal root ganglion, you need to relay in the posterior horn, because posterior is sensory and it takes care of sensation, and anterior is motor and ventral, and that will give you the motor innervation. Now, you guys, I'm gonna say this information now, and I'm gonna say it many times, because this is a very basic information that if I see a student doesn't know it, it means he is just lost in anatomy, in neuroanatomy, and I want to make sure everyone is not lost. What happens, you guys, you as a human being, when you study the neuroanatomy, I want you all the time to relate the information to yourself. Please try to relate the information, try to relate it to what happens around you. Now, if I want to have a sensation, I want to feel something, do you think my brain will tell me what is happening? Of course, no. If I have a sensation, if I am seeing something with my eyes, if I'm hearing something with my ears, if I'm touching, if I'm watching, all these stimulus are going to activate a receptor in my body. And if that is going to happen, I'm going to have the information from there. I'm gonna collect everything from the surrounding all the way to the spinal cord through the sensory neuron all the way to the posterior horn. So sensation, you guys, is what runs up in the spinal cord to the brain, not the opposite. And if I want to do a function, if I want to react to that stimulus, I need to bring the information from my brain, because my brain sends me all the tracts that we're going to talk about. The motor information are going to come, like what we say, the corticospinal tract. We're going to have information from the brain to the spinal cord, and from the motor neurons, I'm going to give it all the way to the muscle to do a function. So remember, the motor, it should come from the brain itself, any of the brain regions. It's going to come from the cerebrum, from the cerebellum, from the brainstem. It should come from there, because from there, this is going to control my body. This is going to tell me what to do. How should I react? How should I walk? How should I control my movement? But if I want to sense, I need to bring the information from the outside environment all the way to the spinal cord first, and then I take the information to the brain, and from there everything is going to be interpreted nicely, everything is going to be grouped together, we're going to have control, and then we're going to send it all the way down. So when we have spinal something, it's sensory. If you have a spinal something tract, it's sensory. You are bringing sensations from outside. And if you have anything other than that into a spinal, it means this is motor, because you are bringing the information and controlling and telling your spinal cord nerves what to do. So if you have corticospinal, vestibulospinal, reticulospinal, wherever where you have, of course, we don't have olivospinal. Um, anything something to spinal is gonna be motor function. Okay, we're gonna talk about this again.